All right, it's been a year since we've all been trapped at home. I know when this started, everyone talked about how many new hobbies they take up and how productive they would be. Yeah, I can't help but laugh at that now. I'm glad we got over that notion quickly, but this did get me thinking about just how hard it really has been over the past year to make time for ourselves and the things that maybe we took for granted before. This was my first year painting full time, and that definitely came with challenges. But I also felt really fortunate to be able to do what I love every day, even in such an unbelievably hard time, especially in such an unbelievably hard time. And so today I wanted to share one of my absolute favorite paintings of 2020 and talk about how I continued to paint and see progress in my work even in such a crazy, stressful, and unreal time when it was really hard to stick with our goals and our hobbies and actually make time for these things. My hope is that whether you're watching this during the pandemic or you're watching it sometime in the future when everything is hopefully back to normal and we're all just really grateful to be going out and seeing family and friends and planning big events and traveling. My hope is that all of these tips will be a helpful guide to actually getting in the studio, sitting down to paint, and making progress toward your art goals, no matter what you might be facing outside the studio. To kick off, I want to talk about maybe the most important thing I learned this past year, which is understanding which paintings may feel easy and super successful, and making sure you actually use this to your advantage. When I first started teaching, something jumped out at me that I didn't have the perspective to notice before. And that is that oftentimes our best work is also the work that's easiest to make. I don't know if I could have noticed this without seeing it happen for students, and what I've observed looks something like this. We see an image that inspires us, we sit down and generally knock it out more quickly and more easily than anything that we normally sit down and paint. And then when we have finished the piece, we often feel this kind of surprising thing, which is that we haven't earned it. So we sit down to the next painting and we try and make our work harder. I want to let this sink in because I know this is kind of a weird, sort of hard to believe thing, but I see it over and over, and I notice it in myself sometimes now too as a result. But what we fail to remember is that there's usually a reason that the painting went so well in the first place, and it's generally the same reason it went so easily. It was that exact sort of composition you had, or the exact subject you were painting, or the exact mood you're in that gave you the capability and the interest to execute on that painting so well. And for whatever reason, I think a lot of us tend to look at the paintings for which we know this is true and just think that those things shouldn't really count. So if we were working on a line drawing, we tend to think, well, I need to render this. If it's a portrait sketch, we think we need to step up and paint the full figure in a big, complex background. If it's a landscape with striking color, we think it should be murkier or busier in order for that piece to matter. And on the one hand, this is great because it challenges us, but more often than not, I think it can hold us back from making the work that we'll be most proud of and that people are going to be attracted to as a result. On the flip side, I've noticed that right after we have one of those magical painting sessions and create the best piece we've ever made, we tend to assume that we've cracked the code and that every painting from there on out will be more and more successful. To put it bluntly, we get greedy. And I think this gets us into a lot of trouble because Then we actually go and attempt that next painting. Now, I don't want to suggest that the next paintings after the really great ones are cursed. No, like seriously, I don't want to cultivate a superstition around this. But I do want to point out that a lot of the time we're psychologically primed for disappointment after a really successful painting. So think of it this way. When you paint that amazing painting that comes so naturally, usually it means all of the planets have aligned to make that happen, especially the first time it happens. You picked a reference with just the right scope for you to tackle the piece confidently. It has the right color that you understand how to mix. The composition and subject are interesting to you. You see how it translates into the style that you really enjoy. And you were also probably in a mood that was conducive to painting this painting. And the list goes on. Most of us aren't aware of even half of the variables that set a painting up for success. And that first painting where everything really aligns, we're usually stumbling on a lot of the right variables without any idea that we're doing it. And even when we look back on that painting, it can be hard to see all of the little things that made that piece possible. So when we complete the piece, we tend to underestimate the role that those variables played and instead just think that it's about us. Suddenly, we're good enough. We've arrived. So we must be able to do this every other time we sit down to paint, right? But without being mindful of every little way that we set ourselves up for success in some paintings, we tend to embark on the subsequent paintings and miss the myriad of ways in which those two painting projects really differed from one another. And now suddenly we have a painting that just doesn't mesh with the way that we work. The colors are wrong, the composition doesn't flow, the brushwork doesn't seem to fit with the image, and the list goes on. So you may be thinking to yourself, well, okay, I'll just be more mindful about what sets my best paintings up for success. And this is fantastic. This is exactly a takeaway that I hope you have here. And it's something I talk to painters about often. But I think it's important to remember that we become more attuned to these variables over time. So sometimes it's important to just give ourselves a little space and accept that our progress doesn't need to be linear in order for it to have a real impact on our growth as artists. I'm going to say this another way because I really want this to sink in. Generally speaking, we're going to have a really, really great painting, and then we're probably going to have a handful of paintings that feel like we're backsliding, and that's part of it. Now I want to change gears a little bit though and talk about mindset, because sometimes it really isn't about the painting itself. If I'm working on a painting that I really want to finish, but I'm feeling stuck on, one of the most helpful things that I've found is to simply give myself permission to put that project on pause and start something new that hopefully feels like one of those more successful, approachable paintings. In a perfect world, I would finish all of my paintings in one sitting, but if I truly do feel like I need to take a break, there's not a big difference between returning to that painting the next day and returning to that painting a week or even a month later when hopefully I have a fresh eye and a fresh attitude. And if every painting is starting to feel that way, it's probably a bit more helpful to insist on taking a break rather than trying to force it. So in this previous example, I really wanted to drive home this idea of not being afraid to put a painting away. But if this is a trend, now we're getting into burnout territory. And I really want to encourage everyone to monitor those feelings of burnout and really give respect to that. Burnout is really rough, and I don't think I've ever seen anyone overcome it by simply pushing through. On the other hand, if you can honor what you're going through enough to insist on a start and end point for a break, that's often enough to let us recharge and get back into a rhythm before inertia sets in. So it's really important in this instance that you be very clear around, I need to take this time away from painting, and I'm going to be really deliberate about choosing things that help me recharge and feel good and give me energy. And I'm going to give myself one day or 1 week or whatever time frame suits you, and actually know when that end point is so that when you reach it, you know it's time to go ahead and get back into the studio. This may feel like a little bit of a sticking point at first, but trust me, if you just set this goal and you tell yourself, this is the day I have to get back in there and resume work, you might feel a little bit of resistance at first, but generally speaking, you do actually get back into the flow pretty easily, and you definitely get back into it more easily than if you just tell yourself you need like a general open-ended break and you're just going to come back to the studio when it feels right. Because usually when we take really big breaks like that, it might not feel right for a really long time, and then we wonder why, and then we spiral into really avoiding getting into the studio at all. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is giving ourselves room to fail. So I want to make a point here that might sound like it contradicts everything that I've been saying about setting yourself up for success. And that is that sometimes you want to make sure that you're giving yourself deliberate room to fail, to make bad paintings, to make mistakes, and to maybe get kind of frustrated. One of the hardest things about this past year is the feeling that I really needed every painting to come out well so that every painting could be a potential revenue source. That is a huge, huge strain on your creativity and your mindset. And when I work with students, this is 100% the thing that I want them to stay away from as much as they possibly can. So when I'm working with artists, what I tell them is basically to do the exact opposite of what I had to go through. And think of every painting as play, not some test that you need to pass. Be curious when something goes wildly awry. Set up paintings to be these low-stakes play sessions so that you can stumble into new, exciting insights and find new ways to make paintings that really excite you. For me, this usually takes the form of small paintings or studies, since they're usually pretty simple to execute and not very high stakes in case they don't go well. Worst case scenario, I've lost maybe a couple of hours of time and not too much in the way of materials. Now compare that to a giant painting that you wanted to spend months on, and it's easy to shrug off those small paintings that don't go well and reframe those as the learning experiences. So if you don't have a lot of small paintings in your regular practice, or you don't have studies as a major part of your practice, I would really encourage you to build this in as much as you can, because it's going to really free you up to learn much more quickly than if you are worried about doing everything as best as you possibly can all of the time. Now, the next thing has made a huge difference for me, and that is to cultivate a community of artists around myself. Whenever I talk to artists and just ask how they've been doing over the past year, the first thing that comes up every time is just how much everyone misses spending time with other artists. Before the pandemic, a lot of us had open studio sessions or life drawing sessions or workshops throughout our entire schedules. And if nothing else, we would get together with other artists over lunch and just talk about what we're making or new work from other artists that we love, and we would get inspired together. I think on some level I must have known this when all of this started a year ago, because it didn't take long into the pandemic for me to start reaching out to artists to form groups that could get together and paint online instead of in person. I found other emerging artists who have trained with the same painters that I have, and I also put together a group of artists looking for mentorship that I meet with twice a week. The funny thing is that when I first started painting, my hope was that my teachers would just take me under their wing and I could eventually just hang out with them. But they wouldn't let that happen. They said that the most helpful thing is for you to find genuine peers. And I'm really glad I didn't resist that message, because finding other emerging artists felt a lot more energizing. And on a day-to-day basis, nothing motivates me the way talking to my mentorship group does. Yes, it's really helpful to be able to ask questions of some of the greatest living artists today. But when you ask someone who is closer to you in level, something kind of wild happens where you both are solving this problem together and you wind up learning so much faster. So now my go-to strategy if I ever feel stuck is to make sure I'm actively seeking out these groups, because having other artists around me supporting me or just spending time with me creates this accountability that really pushes me forward when otherwise I might need that break or I might feel stuck for a while. And on that note, I think it's important to say that we can't always have everything go the way that we want. We're living through a pandemic. It's simply not reasonable to expect that we're going to be achieving peak performance right now. But my hope is that all of these little things can add up to keep us going just enough, because painting isn't just this thing we do in order to be our best selves. It's something we do to cultivate and share joy. So, yes, these tips can help you stay at the top of your game, but I think the real power of everything that I wanted to share with you today comes from when we use these things to simply keep going in times where we might otherwise be tempted to, I don't want to say give up, but take a break or, get pushed off our game or feel discouraged or fall into a funk. I wanted to make this video today for a couple of reasons. First, the painting you've watched me work on this whole time is a great example of a painting that simply came easily. And I really wanted to show you this piece to kind of speak to the power of that principle. But it's not just that. I also really need to hear all of this advice right now. It's been a big year, but I've been needing a break from so many daily paintings that I was doing in January. And I do have a painting that I need to put aside right now so that I can just start another one. And I've been hesitating to put it aside because I'm really excited to finish it and I don't want to fail. But maybe that's exactly what I need to give myself permission to do, to put that piece aside and start something that's lower stakes and easier to enjoy as a result. I think sometimes, especially when things are stressful, we can forget a lot of these things. And having a reminder can make a big difference in terms of getting back on track. I feel so lucky to have my community of artists that I work with each week. Talking to them often helps me realize things that I need to address in my own practice and keeps me accountable in ways that I could easily take for granted. If you're missing that sense of community too, I'm hosting a masterclass on how to work toward your painting goals, even in a pandemic, and answering your questions at the end of that class. The class is free and it'll be at 4 p.m. tomorrow, March 18th at 4 p.m. Eastern. I've put a link in the description to sign up, and even if that time doesn't work for you, if you're interested, make sure to sign up regardless, because there will be a replay that goes out to anyone who signed up after the masterclass is over. And for artists who absolutely love the session, I'll be opening up slots to join my mentorship group so that you can recapture that sense of community, support, and accountability that help keep us on track, even in a pandemic. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it so others can find it, subscribe so that you can see more of my videos, and hit the bell icon to get notified as soon as new videos come out. And if you have any strategies that have really helped you to stay on track with your painting goals this past year, make sure to comment below and tell us all about them. And that is it for this painting. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, happy painting.